Recording. So starting with a couple reminders, there is, of course, the first draft deadline is due on June 26th. So that is coming up 3 weeks from this Thursday. On that day, we're looking for you to have, somewhat well put together, not necessarily polished, but, not just like sort of outlines or bullet points. We're looking for actual sort of essay form drafts of the written materials for the application this year. I want to note that the 3 former Fulbright applicants that we are joined by today, who are joining us today, they had a different application than all of you will have if you are applying this year. So the sort of information conveyed in the application is the same. Statement of grant purpose has been reduced in its length from 2 full pages, single space, to 6,000 characters, which is going to come in somewhere between about 1.5 pages to about 1.2 pages. So notably shorter than it used to be. There is no longer a standalone personal statement, which Danielle, Rachel, and Alba all had to write as part of their applications if you're applying this year. Instead, you have a series of short answer questions that will sort of break a personal statement up into different, more direct questions. But it also amounts to a shorter application on that end of things than it used to be as well. The challenge of the Fulbright application was always that it was a very short amount of space to convey a lot of information because you had to explain why you are motivated to Fulbright, how it fits your goals, why you're a good fit for the sort of bigger purpose of the Fulbright mission, this mission to increase mutual understanding around the world. But also then you had to explain everything you were going to do in a country on a Fulbright grant for a year. It was a lot to fit in. Now you have even less space to fit that in, although you still have to say all of that stuff. So we are focusing today's conversation on how to actually approach writing the application for a study research or open study, interchangeable terms, award type. So for those of you who are applying for Fulbright to either pursue your own independent or creative projects or to enroll in graduate coursework or a graduate degree, those are an open study or study research type of Fulbright award, and those have the 6,000 character statement of grant purpose. So with that, I'd like the 3 of you to introduce yourselves and just briefly tell us, what you applied to do. So Alba, I know you didn't actually go on the Fulbright, but you wound up doing similar things through other grants. So maybe you can then talk a little bit about how the Fulbright led to what was next for you as well. And Rachel, you joined first, so why don't you kick us off?
Sure, no problem. Hi, everyone. My name is Rachel Neal. I am a recent graduate of the Slavic MA program in the Department of Modern Languages and Linguistics. And my Fulbright project allowed me to complete my thesis project for my master's degree, which revolved around studying oral tradition, epic songs in Bulgaria, in a region that I wasn't exposed to during my graduate program. And I affiliated with a local heritage research institution as well as a university in Bulgaria.
Danielle?
Hi, I'm Danielle Warsansky. I'm a PhD candidate in the history department, and I am in the middle of my Fulbright experience right now. So I'm zooming to you guys from Israel, and I did it's a semester-long, 4-month-long research program. I was sponsored by Bar Ilan University, and I've been spending my time at Yad Vashem, which is the Holocaust Institute here in Israel, and I've been using it to really do a deep dive into the part of my dissertation that focuses on the Holocaust, because what I study, or what my dissertation is about, is women spies who worked for the British agency, the Special Operations Executive, during World War II. And I really wanted that Holocaust connection, so I'm using this time to look at when agents were held in concentration camps.
Hi, everyone. My name is Alaba Elisomi. I recently got my PhD in musicology from FSU. I didn't actually win Fulbright, but I was a semi-finalist, which means that my application was sent to my host country for consideration. Um, so I applied in 2022 for 2023-2024 academic year. Like I said, I didn't get it. I was a semi-finalist. But that application actually transformed my dissertation, transformed um, my application for the Mellon ACLS that I actually won. And we can talk more about that when we get into the panel proper. But um, I'm glad to be here, and it's nice to see Rachel and Dr. McCall. So we can dive into it. Thanks.
Yeah, so as you can tell across these three applicants, we had fairly different types of study research awards, from Rachel applying as part of her master's program to an award that is pretty broad in what it allows people to do in Bulgaria, to Danielle applying for a specific, I think it's a specific PhD research award for Israel, right? And then Alaba applying for a partnership award through the UK that would have allowed him, even though he was currently a PhD student at FSU, had he gotten the award, he would have gone to the UK and also gotten a master's from a UK university as part of his route to his PhD at FSU. So Fulbright's extremely flexible, and research, study research awards can look like any one of these three things or quite a wider range of others. I have a series of questions that I'll, ask you all to guide us through this conversation, but I want to invite those of you in the audience to also feel free to ask your own questions of the panelists. You can either raise your hand or take yourself off mute, or drop your questions in the chat as we go. But I'll start with a broad question for each of you, which is just, what was your motivation to pursue Fulbright? How did you know that Fulbright was the right thing for you to do? Again, understanding that Fulbright is not just a grant to give you funding to go abroad to do whatever it is you want to do, but really has this broader mission of um, helping create international connections, international collaborations, and creating a more peaceful world through increasing mutual understanding. So why did that appeal to you? What drew you to Fulbright beyond just wanting to go do the research you wanted to do? Whichever of you want to. Yeah,
I
Danielle,
can
please.
talk a little bit about that. I was initially really inspired by my major professor who I'd worked with for like a decade, Dr. Stoltzfus, and he had won a Fulbright. And it was the award, the plaque on his wall as an undergrad, and then a master's student, and a PhD student that I saw. And he would talk about how valuable and how uh, rich of an experience it was. So that really started to make me very interested in having the experience. And as a historian that doesn't study American history, I knew I would need to travel abroad in order to do the research that I wanted to do, and that I might not have the opportunity to otherwise with funding and things like that. So, um, of course, I also wanted to have an international experience also. I thought would be really beneficial for me. I had the opportunity to study abroad through FSU's programs as an undergrad and found it really, really eye-opening. And so I was eager to have that kind of experience again as a graduate student.
I'll jump in. So, like Danielle, my um, initial motivation was through my professor who actually had who got the distinguished Fulbright award. This is for folks who are full professors, and he got this award to go to Tanzania in 2021. And at the time, I also traveled there to meet him for about 2 weeks. So it was actually quite inspiring. Um, so that was my first motivation for the Fulbright. And Jesse is here. I also spoke to Jesse that year when I got back, and we talked about, Fulbright as one of the opportunities I can consider. But what eventually led to me applying for the Fulbright was my dissertation project, which required me doing multi-site ethnographic research. I needed to do research in the UK, in France, in Nigeria. Um, and one way to be able to do that was to get funding to go to all these places, which is very, very quite tricky for, um, poverty wage, you know, earners, you know, as we are as graduate students. So that was my real motivation. And, you know, my project required that I would need to go to the UK. And Fulbright was just very, very fascinating. I love the idea of cultural immersion and what I'll be able to do through all of these cultural exchanges. So I wanted to take that opportunity to do that. And more so at FSU, we do not have an African studies program, right? And my program is very, very, well, my research is very, very centered in African studies, even though my degree is in musicology. So I thought that would be a great opportunity to do my research in the UK, but also get a master's degree in African studies from the School of Oriental and African Studies. So that those are some of my motivations for the Fulbright Award. Yeah.
I can round this out. So for me, I studied international studies and I had a Russian minor in undergrad, and I had heard about Fulbright very early in my undergrad career. But I wasn't fully aware of the ETA program. So I just imagined it as the very, traditional study research, like what we're talking about today. But I had actually applied for Fulbright, I say 2.5 times, because one of the years, they didn't bring any or send any Americans to Russia. So I don't fully count that, but I did start my application. But the first year I didn't realize that I could be sponsored by my alma mater. I applied at large. I think I got out on a technicality. And then the second year I was trying to figure out how I could start my graduate studies and saw Fulbright as an opportunity to do that. And I was a semifinalist to go to Belgium to start a master's program, but I ultimately didn't get that. So coming into the short term within FSU, once I started my graduate studies, I came up with my thesis idea pretty late compared to other students, especially those who had started in the undergrad Russian program or Slavic program and gone into the graduate program. So I definitely needed more time to develop my project, and Fulbright was a great way to do that. But like I said before, the traditions that I was studying, I was only exposed to 2 through my program and my professor. And so Bulgaria was a new opportunity to bring in comparative studies to the traditions I had already been looking at for my project. And I found that the resources on Bulgaria were not available in English the way that they are for other countries and other traditions. So the only way to really get them was to go there in person and be there in person. So it was kind of twofold benefit for me with my project. But long term, I was interested in Fulbright because I've always been interested in having a career with the government, and specifically, hopefully someday being a foreign service officer, and then ultimately working with the Bureau of Educational and Cultural Affairs. And that, their connection, how they run the Fulbright program, obviously resonates with my career aspirations. And I had volunteered at one of their other initiatives, which is called the American Centers, that are different resource centers abroad. And the staffers there encouraged me to apply for the Fulbright to get that experience and connection with the Bureau.
Great. Thank you all for that. So, the strongest applications for Fulbright are of course very country specific, right? Like there's 2 things you're always trying to prove in a Fulbright application. The first is that you just need to leave the US to do what you want to do. And then the second is that you really need to go to the place that you're applying to go. And in Alabama, I think you probably could have done a Fulbright to Nigeria, right? Instead of the UK, you could have applied to do a study research award to do the Nigeria side of your research, but you chose to go to the UK. Danielle, I think you got archives in Germany that you've also been to before, right? So maybe you could have done a research award to Germany, and Rachel, you've got different interests in that region, and Bulgaria just wound up being the one that was the best fit. So writing that sort of very country specific application requires a good amount of planning, of researching the country that you want to go to, and thinking very deeply about your motivations and goals relative to that specific place. So I'm wondering if you can each talk a little bit about how you approached that, planning the application before even writing. How did you research your host country? Alaba, with a graduate degree enrollment type, how did you research the host institution and think a lot about why that particular program was going to give you what you needed, you know, compared to any of the other partnership awards in UK or any other university throughout the world? Um, so before even you got to the drafting and writing stage, what did your work to plan the application look like?
I guess I'll jump in. Um, well, I'll try to summarize my response. So one thing that I love about the Fulbright process at FSU is that it's quite well structured for you, right? There's a internal deadline, you're doing this interview, but before all that, how did I come to choose the School of Oriental and African Studies, SOAS, and why did I choose the UK? You're right, I could have gone to Nigeria, but I already went to Nigeria twice for my research, so I didn't want to go to Nigeria. Um, I could have perhaps easily won the one in Nigeria, but the UK one, you and I spoke about this. It's highly competitive, right? You have one award for maybe 20 schools. Wait, you have one award for a school, but there may be 20 schools drafted every year. So the schools change every year. And SOAS was one of the programs that was included that year. And my interest was to do research in the UK, but I also love the idea of getting a master's degree in African studies. Um, and of all the schools listed that particular year, it's very sad that you can only apply to one. I would have loved to apply to maybe three, but sadly you can only pick one. And really, if you're going to do African studies in the UK and SOAS is on the list, you're not picking anywhere else, really. Like the decision is already made for me. So the only school I could have chosen for African studies was the School of Oriental and African Studies, in London. Um, but I was also very fascinated about the idea of actually living in London and not a place like Birmingham or Coventry. If I would go to the UK, I want to live in London for a year. So it was those kinds of choices that informed me selecting, School of Oriental and African Studies. My decision to pursue a master's degree, I could have just chosen the research route and not be affiliated to any school. But I really wanted to do it that way. And if I was going to go to the UK, I was at peace with either getting it and going where I want or not getting it at all. So I was at peace with that decision, and I also knew what I was getting into, that this was a highly competitive country to get Fulbright in. But how did I plan out the rest of my, writing? I think the FSU project process again makes perfect sense. One thing I always tell folks is it takes time to write a very solid application. Good writing takes time. And I love that FSU has this process where you just submit a rough draft, and then you continue to workshop that and you continue to work on it, and then you have an actual interview with faculty who have won this award before. And it was that particular interview. I always talk about this. It was that particular interview with two faculty. I don't remember their name. If I go to my email, I'll probably find them. Um, that something actually clicked through that conversation about my research. And that interview, again, I didn't win the Fulbright, but I won the ACLS because of the Fulbright. And I always say that, and that is true, because the opening, what eventually became my opening for the Fulbright Award, um, was suggested by one of the faculty members during the meeting, and that changed everything. So I'll stop there so that others can speak.
I can talk a little bit about it. When I came into the PhD program, I kind of knew that I was going to apply for it. And I remember coming in my very first year as a PhD student to learn more about the timeline and how it would work, how far in advance, you need to start your application and because it takes a while to do your application and then to even find out that you were accepted before you go. And the way my fellowship program is set up is that during the 4th year of my PhD, I have the year off to do research. And so I really wanted to time it well if I were to win the Fulbright so that I could really make the most of this year I already had off. So I started writing and planning in my 2nd year, and in the 3rd year you do the interview and find out if you're accepted or not. And then during the 4th year is when I actually went. So it was quite a long process from beginning it to actually going. And I was also delayed because going to Israel, there were security concerns. So I was originally supposed to go in October, and I didn't end up going until February. So it was actually good that I had this whole year off to have that flexibility with the timing. And it also made sense because I was at the point in my PhD studies where this is the time I needed to be doing the research. That's why I had this built-in research year. And so it made the most sense to time it that way and aim for this to be when I did my Fulbright. So I really had my fingers crossed that I would win the award during this go round. And so I was very fortunate that it all lined up how I hoped it would. And it took a lot of sort of not finagling, but sort of like considering and reconsidering which country I wanted to go to. I'm interested in a lot of things, even outside of my dissertation. So for a while, I thought about going to Albania to study, but then they stopped offering the Fulbright in Albania the next year after I was interested, but also my dissertation research didn't actually really have to do with Albania. It was just a research project I was interested in. So it made more sense to recenter what I wanted to do or what I wanted to propose for the Fulbright to actually have to do with my dissertation, because part of it is not just like where and why, but like why now is a big element of the paper. So of course, maybe in the future when I'm actually doing that research, that will be a better time to apply for grant funding for that. But like the big thing I need to do now is a dissertation. So it made more sense to refocus. I also considered the UK, but I was able to get a fellowship through FSU to be able to go and do research there. So then I didn't really need to go there as well, at least as immediately. And as Alba was saying, the UK is very competitive. It's like the most competitive place to apply to for the Fulbright. And like Dr. McCall told me when I was trying to figure it out, like you should apply for the place that's the best fit, not the place that you're most likely to get accepted to. But it definitely was something that I was sort of thinking about and grappling with. And I also usually a more typical Fulbright research period is like 10 months, I believe, which felt really long for what I wanted to do and the research I had already done. So I was very pleasantly surprised when I found that Israel offered a 4-month, 1 semester long research period, which felt like the perfect amount of time to do the research I wanted to do in Israel, because I wasn't focusing on my entire dissertation, but a portion of my dissertation. So I'll stop there for now.
I had a similar experience, Danielle. So after I had applied a couple of times, I came into my master's program knowing I wanted to apply again, but I had already taught abroad, and by then I was aware of the ETA opportunity. So it really came down to what is my thesis project going to be, and I still didn't know that yet. And how can I possibly maybe make that work with a Fulbright, the thing I've been trying to get for years. So for me, my research is very region specific, like Keith mentioned. So I'm focused in on traditions within the Balkans. And I really had any choice of any of those Balkan countries to go to because none of them really had resources available in English. So there was a good, argument for why I needed to physically be in the country to be able to access these resources that aren't available in the US and aren't available in English. So I with the region specific, and the security concerns, I looked at, where would I be safest? So I started looking up the different, crime statistics and information about the capitals and the countries initially. And I narrowed it down to a few different options, and I still wasn't exactly sure where to go. But I actually had a friend who had done Fulbright in Bulgaria, and that was one of the options like that I had narrowed down to on my list. And so I just reached out to him and asked what his experience was like. And he was very emphatically supportive of me applying for Bulgaria and spoke very highly of his experience and the staffers there, and went as far as to connect me with a member of their Fulbright committee so I could ask him some specific questions. And so ultimately, after I got that recommendation and determined that that would be a safe place to go with a good opportunity for learning and comparative research for my project, it was definitely what I felt to be the best option, and that recommendation meant a lot to me, that he spoke so highly of his experience there.
Yeah, the Fulbright Bulgaria Commission has been extremely like active in outreach, and
yeah, they come to
they,
the US like 2 or 3 times a year and speak at different conferences and
yeah,
table and things like that.
clearly like you hit at the right time to go to Bulgaria because they've been so interested in growing that program and supporting people coming there. But a theme that emerges from all three of what you just said is that even for those of you in the audience today who might be still deciding between more than one country, you might be thinking of two or three. Eventually, there's one that just seems like it is the right one for you, whether it's something about like the length of time that they allow and thinking, well, yeah, 10 months seems long, but I could go to this country and only go for 4 months, and that seems perfect. To, as Alba said, if he was going to go get that degree, there was, the choice was made for him basically of what school you would go to do that, right? Um, to Rachel, discovering that there was a lot of support for Bulgaria, and that, once she started talking and connecting with people in Bulgaria, it seemed like the best fit. Even when other countries may have allowed the same or at least similar research to happen. So that's a good takeaway from there, is that, if you dig a little and think about those countries, one of them is going to stand out as like the right one for you to apply to. And to echo what Danielle said, that while you can look at statistics for how competitive any particular country or award is, we would encourage you not to do that, or at least not to make your decision based on that, because a poorly, a not very well argued application to a country that's not very competitive is still going to be a less competitive application than a really strong application to a highly competitive award. So choose the one that you are the best fit with, that you feel the most enthusiastic about. So thank you all for sharing that, because I think those are great points. To get back a little bit to the application itself, again, there's these different written components, and you all had a slightly different mix of written components than current applicants will. But the one that is, certainly still there is the statement of grant purpose, which is the lengthiest document in the Fulbright application, and it is where you say what you're going to do on that Fulbright grant, what you're actually going to do in the country. So, sort of two questions here. I'll ask it in a couple ways, I guess. Is you can answer either both or one. First, just what was the most difficult aspect of the statement of grant purpose for you to write? Because you're trying to cover a lot in there. You're trying to give readers a broad sense of what your project is and why it matters. And you're speaking there to different review audiences, one in the US, one in your host country. You don't know who those reviewers are going to be. They're not necessarily, or usually they are not at all, experts in your particular field. So you've got to explain your project in very broad terms. You have to talk about the contribution and significance in broad terms, but you also have to tell them how you're filling the time there, whether it's 4 months or 9 months or 10 months. So some sense of like the timeline to your project, the logistics of your project. It's a lot to do. So I want to know what part you think you individually struggled with the most in writing the statement of grant purpose. What time, what part took you the most to think through and to draft? But also, how much did your project change over the course of the different iterations of your statement of grant purpose? And I just opened my folders and looked, and each of you went through at least 4 or 5 different versions of the statement of grant purpose over the course of the summer. So a lot of revision happens between the first draft and that campus deadline. So
for me, it was really difficult to know how I was going to accomplish the thing that I wanted to accomplish. So I knew I needed access to these resources. I knew they didn't exist in English, and that they didn't exist in the US. So how does that, translate to how do they exist in their native country? So for me, even though I wasn't required to have an affiliation, I found that the only way for me to be able to flesh out what I was going to do in Bulgaria was to find strong affiliations that would be able to connect me with the resources I needed to even accomplish the research that I wanted to accomplish. So I think the affiliations initially felt the most daunting and difficult, and I wasn't really sure where to start. And so I reached out to the contact email listed on Fulbright for Fulbright Bulgaria, and they were so kind, and they immediately knew of institutions that would be interested in my project, would be able to help support my project, and connected me with them. And they had hosted Fulbrighters in the past, had been known to host Fulbrighters in the past. So that was a relationship that they were willing to support. And so that initially most difficult thing became a lot easier once I got connected to the right institutions, because then I got to talk to them when I was trying to flesh out the affiliation, and they gave me pointers on what I'd be able to do and the resources they had available and how they would be able to help my project. So those affiliations became an essential part of how I'm going to do my project, even though they weren't strictly required in my application.
yeah, so Rachel, if I remember correctly, part of revising for you was that like initially your project was this big, grand, very ambitious, and it was a sort of scaling it back to something that really could be done in the length of the Fulbright grant, right? Because feasibility is important too. So if you tell them a research project that is a 2 or 3 year long endeavor, but you're asking to go there for 8 or 9 months, that's a bit of a mismatch, and usually leads to a weaker application. So I think we had to get a little bit more specific in what you're going to do, but also a little less ambitious in the sort of grand scope that you initially sort of imagined maybe working out.
Yes, exactly. I had, originally wanted to do a lot of, maybe my own translations after acquiring some Bulgarian skills. And I wanted to do like a survey of, I don't know, 60 to 100 songs and all these different things. So yes, I definitely, I scaled down. You're absolutely right about that. So I said, hopefully at least one good translation. Here's 3 songs that I'm potentially interested in doing that on, that I'm aware of in Bulgaria that exist. And I don't think I ended up putting a number on how many songs I wanted to just, read and explore, but that it would contribute to my thesis project comparatively to the other 2 traditions I was studying. So scaling down was very important for me. But I was ambitious. I really wanted to do it all. And I thought in 10 months I could do it all. But
Yeah.
I'm glad
Well,
I
and
scaled down, because it's very different in practice than what you imagine when you're writing it down on papers.
right, and Fulbright will never be upset if you wind up getting more done than you propose, right? It's just, but you'll also not really make it through the review again if you propose something that seems unrealistic to do within the allotted time. So Danielle or Alba, what about you all? What did you find most difficult in approaching the actual application?
Um, I'll highlight two points that I consider some of the most difficult aspect of the application. One is answering all the whys, like why this project, why now, why this school, why this country, without actually answering them, but helping the audience understand or to appreciate the significance of the proposal. Um, and let me rephrase that. I think one of the most challenging aspects of any grant application, Fulbright included, is articulating the significance of your project. But in the case of Fulbright, it's even compounded, because now you also have to talk about why this place. why this school, if you do decide to study somewhere, why this country, and all these other whys. It was quite interesting. I wouldn't say challenging, but quite interesting. And if you really just stick to the timeline created by FSU, I think that timeline allows a lot of time for you to really think through. I don't think anyone will be able to submit a competitive Fulbright application if you just put all of that together in a month. No. So the FSU process, really, to be honest, it's very, very fascinating and would help anyone who follow through, write one of the best application. Because these questions, when you continue to think about it over a week, 2 weeks, 1 month, 2 months, you would have perhaps one of the best answers to all the whys within 2 3 months by the time you start thinking about them. So the timing part of the application and the process at FSU, for me, helped me uh, to not see all of this as quite difficult or challenging, really, but I had time to think about it. But I was also in the second year of my PhD, so I was already done with coursework, or I think I was rounding up coursework, so I was preparing for my preliminary exams. So part of what I was writing for my preliminary exam, basically 40 50% of that part of my preliminary exam is what I'm trying to articulate in the Fulbright, with my project. But the most difficult part, if I would say, is, and perhaps even more difficult for you guys now, is the length of the writing. So how do you convey so much? I'm not trying to scare you guys. Don't be scared. But how do you convey so much and answer all this why within just, quite limited pages? It was 2 pages when I applied, single space. So that was about 4 pages, double space. But now I'm sure you guys are up to it, so you'll be fine. But another aspect of that, in addition to the whys, is writing for an interdisciplinary audience, people who are experts in their own fields, but who might not know so much about your field. So how do I write, uh, in a sophisticated musicological approach, but also not watering down too much that, let me rephrase that. How do you write to an interdisciplinary um, committee that can understand the disciplinary specifics of your field, but also understand how broad, and can also relate to your project? How do you make your project relatable to people who are not in your discipline? I think that's perhaps, maybe even the most challenging. So I think I've talked about 3 points now. Talking about answering all the whys, and the significance of your project, um, writing for a very broad audience, and doing all of this in a very limited space. So I would say, for me, those were the challenging part of this application. In terms of change, I'm switching to the second question now. In terms of how to what extent did my project change? It changed a lot. Uh, I had I had 5 drafts by the time I submitted. So between starting and the time that I submitted, I'm looking at my folder right now. I have 5 drafts. Um, and this is my advice to everyone who is applying right now. I know sometimes, um, you you're very sometimes fixated on an idea, um, and which is good. You have an idea coming into this open. There's something you want to do, and this. But I would say be flexible, be open-minded, and the best research are not research that you already have answers to. The best research are research that are open-ended, and you're open to go into whatever direction it takes you. So let the project lead you where it needs to go. That's what I would say. Let it lead you, be open-minded. As you continue to write, you'll find new ideas, you'll find, new pointers. You might end up not even doing what you initially thought you would do, and that's fine. So be open-minded. I'll leave it at that.
Yeah, that's great. The one why Alaba didn't mention, but of course you have to make the argument for too, is why you, right? Like, it's one thing to propose having a great project, and the reviewer can read through that and think this is a great project, and then they think, but I don't see why this person's the right person to do it. So just we don't need to talk about that anymore right now, but just keep that in mind. And I also want to point out that while Alaba went through 5 drafts, and I think the Rachel and Danielle had 5 drafts as well. I'm looking in my folder from one year, and one student had as many as 9 different drafts of their statement of grant purpose. So revision is definitely a big part of producing a strong Fulbright application. So Danielle, why don't you round us out here? How much does your application change, and what was really challenging for you about the statement of grant purpose or other aspects of the application?
I don't think once I picked my country and what I was applying for, my project itself didn't really change, but it was more about tailoring the way that I was presenting it to better answer the questions that we've all been mentioning, like why you, why now, why this project? And like Alaba said, for me, something that came up was like making it interdisciplinary, because the people that are going to be reading your materials are not from your field. I even had that come up in my interview process, where they were like, "What does this mean?" And I was like, doesn't everybody know what that means? And like you forget that you have like a scholar's hat on, and it can be hard to know what other people don't know. And that's
Mm.
part of, the great thing about working with OGFA is like to have this other perspective as you're going through, to make sure you're making your writing as clear as possible to other people. And with each draft, I think for me, it was really explaining like, why am I going to this place? How does my project fit? Why, out of everything, of all the Fulbright things I could apply for, why is it this one? And for me, I really wanted to go to Yad Vashem, this leading institution in the Holocaust. But more than that, I wanted to be able to access the Erelson archives, which is an online database that's only accessible in person in only 6 locations in the world. So like how to articulate, well, why don't you go to it in the US, or why don't you go to it at this other location? Why there? And just like how, and underlining or underscoring like how imperative it was for me to see this online database, and different things like that, just really reinforcing why I needed to go and how relevant it would be to my research. And sometimes that can be difficult because when you're applying for a research grant, it means you haven't been there, so you don't know 100% what they have. And part of the reason you're going is because none of that material has been digitized. So like you have to go in person, but then it's hard to make claims like I'm going to do this and I'm going to find that when you only have an idea of what the archive might have. And I know that isn't a universal problem for all facets of people applying for the Fulbright, but definitely for research, that was something that made it difficult to write and make something deliverable in my application. So that's how it changed and what was sort of most difficult for me to grapple with as I was writing.
Yeah, and I appreciate you raising those points about the research, in the sense that, one of the things you're trying to convey in the statement of grant purpose is what that research actually looks like. And you're saying that to people who, again, they aren't in your same field. So you can't just say, well, I'm doing archival research, because you might be talking to people who aren't historians, who aren't other archival based practitioners, and they might then think, well, why do you even need 4 months to do that? I mean, couldn't you do that in a week? So you're trying to give them a sense, but also you can't necessarily say, I know I'm going to find this or that. But you also can't say, I don't know what I'm going to find, because, it needs to be a little bit more specific than that. So there's a lot of different things to balance when you're trying to talk through the actual like methodology and sort of on the ground what you're doing in the country as part of that application. I want to take a chance here to see if anybody in the audience has questions for our panelists, either for a specific panelist or just generally to the panel.
I have a question.
Please.
Okay, so I'm currently like a graduate student. Like I'm gonna be graduating hopefully by the fall of this year. So I know I still like qualify, but I kind of like I feel like I qualify for two, like the research study award and also like the graduate study program like interest.
Okay.
In both like award types, I still have to come up with like a proposed like research study in a way, right? Of my host country that I'm looking forward to doing.
Yeah, so even with a graduate degree enrollment type application, basically a statement of grant purpose should be framed around a set of research or academic questions that you're going to pursue through either your independent project or through a graduate degree enrollment. Like Alaba had a very beautiful application that did not just talk about SOAS and the classes he would take there. It talked about the research he was doing, what his dissertation was, and how this program would allow him to pursue the questions of his dissertation. So yeah, I mean, whether it's a study research award, well, if it's a study research award, whether it's a graduate degree enrollment or a independent type project, you do want to have it be a sort of very specific question or set of questions you're pursuing through that research time in the country. In terms of whether you're like qualified for the award as a graduate student, just to review eligibility real quick, as long as you do not have a PhD by the time of the application due to Fulbright, which is I think October 7th, 2025, you are eligible to apply. Even if you will have a PhD by the time you would go on your grant, as long as you don't have it, you are eligible to apply. If you're a graduate student, if you're a master's student, you do not have to be enrolled as a student to either apply for Fulbright or to go on a Fulbright. Does that answer your questions, Brittany?
Yeah, it kind of does, because I feel like as a graduate student who will be graduating, I'll be the student that already graduated from school, and I'm leaning more towards like a research for my host country, because I already kind of figure out my idea of where I want to go. It's just me of thinking about like how would I kind of put in a broad sense, as the panelist has been saying, the methodology and the reason why I have to specifically go to that place.
Well, that is why we have the advising process that Alaba keeps talking about. That is the challenge everybody is going to be going through. And happy to follow up individually as well, Brittany, to to talk with you more specifically about your application.
Thank you.
Of course. Any other questions?
Hey Keith, I have two questions real quick. One
Okay.
of them is for Rachel, and the other one is kind of like an open question for like the panelists. For Rachel, I was gonna ask you, for you, what did you find the most difficult process in just the whole application?
The full application. I think compared to our other panelists, there were things that were more set out for me. Because the why is kind of inherent in the research that I'm doing. It's a dying tradition that's been dying since really the early 1900s, and because it's orally transmitted, they didn't start being written down for a long time. So there's just this essential idea of cultural preservation in conducting the research that I'm conducting. I think I also had difficulties conveying the why me initially. I had started talking about kind of my background in like more Russian specific Slavic studies for my undergrad, and then I taught English abroad in Russia and lived in Russia for a few years. And I was trying to convey kind of the experience of the war starting and how that's impacting the Slavic studies community in general. But I think it was ultimately like really distracting. I think Keith and I and a couple other people I talked to ended up coming to that conclusion. And then for my interview, they really the panel posed that question, like, why you? Like, we get it, like, you've studied like Slavic languages and you're in this master's program, but why you? So then I had to dig a little bit deeper to look at my, musical background and my interest in music and growing up with a father who was a musician. And then my undergrad project, which focused on women's studies, and I don't think I've mentioned that yet, but the focus of my project was on women's roles in these heroic societies based on these songs and this tradition. So then I was like, well, I did this project in undergrad that focused on women's studies, and I'm a current Slavic master's student. So the combination of why me, of those things for why me, of my musical background and interest, and my family, my, interest and my experience in women's studies and gender studies, and my interest and experience in Eastern Europe, and my current master's degree with the long-term goals that I had, ultimately allowed me to answer that question. But I think that was something that I struggled with throughout the whole time, was why me, even though it seemed really obvious to me why me, getting more specific and diving deeper. But I think a lot of the traditional things that people struggle with, like conveying the importance or talking in a, more approachable manner, I didn't have as much difficulty with that. And once I got my affiliations, the how I was going to do it wasn't very difficult. So just really honing in on, I'm the perfect person for this project, and this is why. Took me a long time, but I eventually got there at the very end, I think, in like one of my final drafts. And I remember Keith being like, that's the perfect line. And I was like, we got it.
Yeah, I think there's sort of a like knee-jerk reaction to think that, well, I proposed the project, so obviously I'm the right person to do it. But that's not the way reviews work.
Right. And like, they don't know me. Whereas like, I'm thinking, of course, like I know all my experience, like, my professors and you came to know me over time, but I didn't think about how I had to make sure I conveyed, or didn't realize, this goes even deeper than I thought it does, like for why I have come to this project on my own and why it would be perfect for Fulbright. It took me a lot of soul searching to figure that out.
Yeah.
So the rule for answering the whys is show, don't tell. That's the best way to approach it.
Absolutely. Alessandro, you had a second question?
Yeah, I did have a second question, but I appreciate the insight, Rachel, into like just the whole process, and also just like learning about you and how you kind of incorporated yourself into, and really like put yourself, like the personal as well as the academic side, that kind of allowed for like a complete and cohesive like application.
Happy to do it. I'm happy to chat with anyone, outside of this event too. If anyone wants to look me up on LinkedIn or something.
My second question was kind of like pretty open, and it was for like all of you guys, Rachel, Teniel, and Alibut. Damn, I forgot my question. Oh my god. Damn. Oh yeah, my question was damn, no, I forgot my question. You're gonna have to give me a second. I'm gonna get back to you on that.
Yeah, well, in the meantime, Zoe asked a question in the chat saying the Fulbright community in each host country has been mentioned a couple times. What does that community look like, and what services do they provide for their scholars? And I'll turn this over to each of you to talk about your experiences with that, but I'll preface it by saying one of the most common answers that we will give to anything for Fulbright is it depends. Fulbright communities, Fulbright support in every country are going to look really different. Some countries have huge Fulbright programs where they might have close to 200 ETAs there a year, and then a handful of study research people. Germany has 70 study researchers in there each year. Some countries have much more organized Fulbright commissions. Some don't have Fulbright commissions, and Fulbright is run through the U.S. Embassy in that country. So Fulbright looks really different on the ground, depending on what country you go to and what type of award you're doing. But each of you can tell us a little bit about, did you meet other Fulbrighters? Did you have much contact with your commissions? Alba, did you reach out at all? Did you have any exchanges with Fulbright as part of planning your application at all? So whoever wants to answer that, feel free.
I can talk about it since I'm here right now. So for Fulbright Israel, they have their own office in Tel Aviv, and I was in communication with them a lot before I got here because I was having difficulties to actually get there. And so they started communicating very closely with FSU, so to keep them apprised of the situation, and how things would, like what protocols were over here. So I felt really comfortable and like I knew them well. They were in communication with me as soon as I landed in the country. There's a WhatsApp group chat for all of the scholars in Israel at the same time, and they even had group chats for people who were residing in the same region or the same city. So that if we wanted to be connected or had questions or anything like that, we had people that we could reach out to, and it was very easy to connect with them. Fulbright Israel also does like a monthly social gathering in a different part of the country once a month. Unfortunately, I only got to go to one because I got there too late in February. And then in March, there were security concerns, so it was canceled. And then April, it was Passover and many other holidays in Israel, so they canceled it. So I only got to go to the one in May. But I saw all the ones they were offering during the year, and they were really cool. The one we went to an art gallery and had a private tour with the curator, and we were all together, and there was a reception, and it was really nice, and it was really easy to be able to connect with the other scholars as well as the team. They also, in their office in Tel Aviv, have a room that if you're in Tel Aviv, you could go and just sit and do work and have a quiet space to do anything. Any kind of questions I had, they were on top of it. They were constantly reaching out, checking in on me. There were a lot of wildfires this summer in Israel. So anytime there was something going on like that in my area, they would reach out to personally check on me, which I was very grateful for. I felt very cared for and protected. And I'm trying to think, they were just really, really supportive and great. And they were even connecting me with students from Israel who had gone to the United States to do Fulbrights, and we were in related fields. So even though I study history, I also have a really big theater background. So they connected me with an Israeli student in the US doing their master's in theater arts administration, which was really cool to be able to connect with. And there's another playwright that's going to be in this year's cohort coming to the United States. So being able to connect with these other people and to have this like ever widening circle and network of scholars. So even after my Fulbright experience is over, I'll be able to have this connection with all these other people who were also doing the Fulbright in my host country. So it was really awesome in a nutshell for me.
That's great.
Yeah, I had a very similar experience in Bulgaria. So like Keith mentioned, whether they have a commission or they're run through the embassy. So Bulgaria has a commission, and they are seasoned professionals. I think pretty much every staffer there had been there for at least 10 to 15 years, if not going on 20 or 25 years. So they've been doing this for a long time and were very dedicated. So I spoke to them ahead of time to get assistance with my affiliations because I just didn't know where to start. How do I start finding these places to do these things in Bulgaria? So I reached out to the coordinator who oversees the Students and Scholars program for Americans coming to Bulgaria, and she was very responsive, extremely helpful. And I'm sure the commission is listed somewhere if the country that you're interested in does have a commission, but I connected with one of the commission members through my friend who was a Fulbright alumnus. But if I'm sure you could reach out to the commission directly too. So he was able to answer some more questions I had about logistics, what could happen. So he was the one who suggested, oh, well, maybe if you're having trouble with the resources, you could hire a translator to translate some of the songs for you that you're interested in if you want a more exact translation in English to use in your thesis, which was something that hadn't even crossed my mind, was to hire someone for translation services for these old songs. And once I was there, like Danielle was saying about her experience there in Israel, there were multiple events where they would bring us on different excursions or cultural experiences. We did cooking classes, we did little field trips to different notable sites of heritage and history in Bulgaria. And then they also had events with the Bulgarian Fulbrighters going to America. So we got to network with those Fulbrighters, and we were actually invited to some of the embassy events as well. So we had the envoy on Holocaust issues actually who had come to Bulgaria and her team. And so Fulbright had an event, a reception for her, and she spoke to us and her staffers spoke to us. And then we got to network and discuss whatever we wanted with them and introduce ourselves. They also had a speaker event around Thanksgiving where they had their Bulgarian Fulbrighters come and present talks on really whatever they wanted, but most of them did it on their Fulbright project that they did in the US or were going to do in the US. And so I had a good experience, you know, both interacting with the ETAs at different specific American Fulbrighter events, a mix with the Bulgarian Fulbrighters, and then other things that Fulbright would be a part of, like a photo exhibit from Fulbright Ukraine and other things. So both before the application or during the application, and then once I was there, Fulbright Bulgaria was extremely supportive, and as well as the wider community of Fulbrighters, both American and
Yeah, I want to emphasize the point Rachel is making, that is that you know, you should be very familiar with the award profile for the award that you're applying to. And it will tell you everything you need to know about that particular, you know, country and award that you're applying to. But down at the bottom of it, if you scroll all the way down, you'll see a couple different contact emails listed. One of them is going to be either somebody at the commission or the U.S. Embassy for that country, who you can ask very country-specific Fulbright questions to. So there will also be somebody through the Fulbright program for the region that you can ask more sort of general programmatic questions about the way Fulbright operates. But because Fulbright is different in every country, sometimes it can be really useful to make contact with that local person in the country to ask, you know, those specific types of questions. And you know, not every country will, but some will help with affiliations, and they'll make that clear underneath the affiliation portion of that award profile. So if you read there and it says something about, you know, the commission is happy to help with helping you find affiliations, then, you know, absolutely reach out to them to do that. Now, don't just do a throwaway, like, I just want to make, you know, don't send them an email to ask a question that you could have answered yourself by just reading that award profile a little bit more carefully, of course. But if you have legitimate, real questions, don't hesitate to contact them. And if you, for some reason, have a question that you feel is a little sensitive, or you're not really sure if you want to ask it under your own name, as the Fulbright program advisors, we are also happy to reach out on your behalf. So if you tell us that you would like to ask this question of that country, we can email and say, we have a, you know, a student interested in applying for this country. They have these questions. So keep that in mind as well. And Alessandro, I see that you
I
have.
thought of one more thing, just really quickly, Keith.
Yeah.
About the like services provided while you're there. I just thought of for Zoe. I had an issue with my housing while I was there, and Fulbright, the commission and some of the staffers actually sat down with my landlord and helped us negotiate and try and come to a resolution about that. So anything that you know, would be, you know, very like critical, where you really need a native speaker, or you know, you just need kind of more of a strong affront to present. They were definitely helpful with those kind of things. When it came to kind of hiccups and issues in the actual implementation of my project, Fulbright Bulgaria expected us, you know, to make those executive decisions. So if something wasn't serving us in our project, something wasn't working, to make that decision, handle that with your affiliate or whoever the other entity or person would be that they needed. And they told us that these things were going to happen, and to expect it, and to be flexible and find solutions and do what you need to do. So I had a lot of hiccups like that between my, you know, affiliation and the language classes that I thought would serve me that did not end up serving me well, and things like that. So they're there to help you when you really need them, but at least for their approach to it, for us students and scholars, if we ran into issues with our actual project itself, they expected us to find solutions and try different things and be flexible.
Right, that's very fair. I mean, you were certainly now there is a short answer that is specifically about your flexibility and adaptability, which has always been something you were supposed to include in the application, but now that is one of these specific questions that is being asked this year. So Alessandro, you remembered your second question.
Yeah, my question was kind of throughout like the process of writing, your letters of intent, where were you guys kind of going for feedback? And like, was that something you guys were constantly going through? Because I remember you guys mentioned like the numerous drafts you guys had to like revise and change. So where were you guys headed for feedback?
I was mostly working, oh, so
Oh,
sorry.
sorry, I'll just say, like, so if you're applying and you're doing it through the campus process, we certainly have an expectation that you are getting feedback from us. For graduate students, I ask that you have at least 4 times of sending me something for feedback. But one of the questions I was going to ask that I didn't, and I would love to incorporate here too, is who else did you all ask for feedback? Were you also getting feedback from your faculty, from anybody else, from peers? So Danielle, please go ahead. Take
I
it
was
away.
just I was just gonna say I mostly worked with you, and then my brother is also a grad student, so I had him take a couple looks, but that was it.
I worked really closely with my thesis advisor, which I think is kind of intuitive. But so I had an idea of like going into the archives and being really interested in trying to find some of these old songs or research projects that were done on these songs. And he was like, nope, that is not realistic for you to do with your language skills. You would have had to have been studying Bulgarian for a lot longer than you have, and your Russian's only going to bring you so far and things like that. So he was really essential in helping me find like realistically how can this project take form over there, and things to avoid so that I didn't waste my time or go through unnecessary struggles. My brother is also he has a PhD. He does engineering, so a bit different from me and my social sciences, but I thought it was a good, unique perspective since he kind of uses the other side of his brain more than I do. And I did a workshop through the OGFA. I don't know if you guys are still doing it. There's a summer workshop where I got to work with other graduate students who were interested in applying for Fulbright and were drafting their application. And I felt like I provided a lot to the group mate that I had because she was applying for an English teaching assistantship, and I had taught English abroad. And then I also got some good, perspectives from people who have no idea what I'm doing and who I am and what any of my project meant. So I highly recommend that workshop if they're still providing it over the summer.
We are, and we'll be announcing it in, I don't know, 2 weeks maybe.
Definitely sign up for that.
Alaba, yeah, please. I see you took yourself off mute.
Yeah, I primarily worked with you, especially for my first 3 drafts, because I was trying to manage um, comment and suggestions, so I wanted to limit, my reviewer to just you, I think, for the first 3 drafts. And then the last 2 drafts, 2 of my professors read it. And then I had friends outside of musicology also read it, so that I was sure I was explaining what I was really interested in to a very broad audience. But yeah, that was my own set of reviewers.
And I'm putting this in the chat right now, but Alba also wrote a little thing about seeking and incorporating feedback that we published in a OGFA newsletter back in, well, last summer, I think. So I'm going to drop that link, and you can read Alba's more formal thoughts on feedback. Well, it is 12:12. We were supposed to end at 12, and we've gone over. But thank you all for extending your time with us. I don't want to take up too much more time. Rachel, I believe you're on your lunch break, so definitely don't want to take up too much more of your time. But if anybody has any closing thoughts, please share them. If not, then again, we'll make this recording available in the coming days, and make sure that you are aware of it if you are in the Fulbright site. Again, drafts are due on June 26th, so please reach out to me, Jesse, Bonnie, Sam, for any questions you have leading up to that draft, and we look forward to working with all of you.